strange thing about Warnie's hand was that he had a strong hand, a big hand, stubby fingers. When he shook your hand, he enveloped it, but he didn't grip it hard. There is a bit of a tradition in Australia of the really, really tough, masculine handshake. Warnie didn't have a handshake like that, and he caressed the ball. He actually held the ball quite gently. He didn't grip it really tightly. Jenna was very puzzled about this when he first met Warne and said, why aren't you really gripping it tightly? Warne just said, well, it doesn't feel right. And it was all about feel with Warne. It was all about his sympathy for the ball through his hands. He did what came naturally. In some respects, he discovered leg spin from first principles.
The prodigal son turned Messiah gets a second 100 in successive.
India have won in dramatic style. The whole of Bengal are on their feet.
Diego! Not that important. He's gone the next ball. The dream has diminished for Carlos Bradford.
Welcome to another episode of the PCCI podcast. Today we are here to celebrate the life and times of my favorite cricketer and the greatest cricketer of all time. Like someone said, you can argue as to who was the best, and I have no part in that debate. But the greatest definitely was Shane Keith Warne. To discuss Warne, we have someone who, amongst other things, likes the TV show The Wire, business histories, Sherlock Holmes stories, Michael Atherton, Bishan Singh Bedi, the TV show Succession, and to cap it off, Peppa Pig. He actively plays cricket in Melbourne for his club, the Yaras, is one half or one third of the cricket website, cricketetal.com, and runs the podcast Cricket et al. With Peter Lawler. And dare I say, a friend of the pod and the best cricket writer of our time, Gideon Haigh. Welcome again, Gideon.
It's great to be back. I'm still actively playing. Active is probably stretching it now, but I did have a hit this morning, and that was fun. And it was interesting. I watched. We've got a young leggy, Aditya. Gives it a real rip. Not massively. I mean, he's a club standard leg spinner, and he bowls probably bowls one ball in every four. Is a really good delivery, like an absolute jaffa. But it's still one in every four. And he's a pretty good leg spinner. You just think, when I look at someone like that, I think, boy, what you do is really, really hard. That's a really tough skill. And I think the Warne did it right all the bloody time. Isn't it incredible? This incredibly difficult skill, one of the most difficult skills in all of cricket, landing a leg spinner on the spot. And Shane Warne, for 15, 20 years, did it better than anyone else in the history of the game.
It's interesting that you say that it's so bloody difficult, because that's something that's often missed when we are playing cricket. Because even when we are playing, let's say, in my building or at a ground, and I'm sure the same is with you, bowlers are often told what to do and are expected to follow. And more often than not, a pace bowler, or at least a medium pace bowler and an off spinner can do what they're told. But it becomes exceedingly difficult for a leg spinner to essentially go through whatever has been told to them, because the art is so exceedingly difficult.
Yes, yeah. Physically, it's very demanding. Psychologically, it's very demanding. You're very, very dependent on the conditions in which you're bowling. Probably no one in cricket is so dependent on conditions as a leg spinner, and the demands on you are relentless. And you're very quick to be told that a leg spinner is too expensive, or a leg spinner is unfashionable. That was certainly the case before Warne appeared. When Warne was first picked by Victoria in 1991-92, I remember Simon O'Donnell, who was Victoria's captain, was very dismissive of the idea of that a leg spinner could be penetrative or successful in first class cricket. I remember his remark was, whenever a leg spinner turns up these days, everyone goes a bit honky tonk. And well, no one was a bigger honky tonker than Warne.
It's interesting because that leads me to my first question, and this is from Shane Warne, The Portrait of a Flawed Genius by Simon Wilde, and Patrick Collins writes about it in The Wisdom. Is that in 1992, an old leg spinner named Kerry O'Keefe watched a young leg spinner play his first test match for Australia. He was not impressed. Overweight, slightly round arm, no variation, can't bowl, was his verdict. A few weeks earlier, Matthew Hayden spotted the youngster acting as a 12th man for Victoria in a match against Queensland. He was sitting in front of the changing rooms, and Hayden recalled he had a pie in one hand and a cigarette wedged between his fingers and a can of Coke in the other hand. Hayden said to a colleague, "Have a go at this bloke. He's absolutely no hope."
Yep.
So what does...
And look, to his credit, Warne did realise that he hadn't put in the effort that his talent justified, because he does go back to the drawing board after that first test, and he does work very hard. And a taste of international cricket is enough to stimulate his appetite for it. He works relentlessly through 1992, gets himself on the Sri Lankan tour, gets smashed out of sight in the first innings by Romesh Kalawitharana, but in the second innings takes 3 very important wickets at a crucial moment in the game, probably wins it for Australia. And what I find interesting about that episode is that the captain is Alan Border. Now, Alan Border at the time is, in hindsight, in history, goes down as a bit of a roundhead, a bit of a conservative captain. The man who stood between Australia and defeat so many times, who did things his way in an uncompromising fashion. And in the clinch, when that game is up for winning, he throws the ball to Warne. Why does he throw the ball to Warne? He just has a feeling. He just has a feeling that Warne gives him, and that a leg spin in general gives him, that sometimes they can change situations that other bowlers can't. And Warne takes the opportunity to secure, to take those first few wickets, that first match-winning performance, and it's a foretaste. I mean, I don't think there's any footage of that Test match out there, but it was indelible in Warne's mind, the fact that he'd taken, I think, 1 wicket in Test cricket to that point for something like 300. Now all of a sudden he took 3 in a rush and won a Test match for Australia. And even though it's not as though he didn't look back, once he got a taste for it, once again, he didn't want to let go.
And does this also mean that because Warne was a leg spinner and he thought, and then he willed himself to do things, the impossible at a lot of times. And I'm jumping into a later part of the conversation, which I'd planned, but it seems apt. Is that why he was a great captain as well?
He's an interesting captain. I think his best results as captain were achieved in young teams that naturally looked up to him. First of all at Hampshire and second at the Rajasthan Royals. And of course, by the time he gets to Rajasthan, he's a legend. He is Warne.
Yeah.
And his greatest attribute as a captain is that he is Warne. And when Shane Warne puts his arm around you and says, "I reckon you can play, son," it's massively uplifting for was it Asnodka, Cameron Khan in that first season of at the Rajasthan. He's got a dressing room that is in his thrall. Interestingly, he never achieved the same success for Victoria as a captain. And I think there's got to be some question about whether he would have been a successful Test captain for Australia. It's certainly not a given. It in that Australian side that he was playing in, they're all kind of wise to Warne. They'd all played alongside him. It was a very, very experienced team. He wouldn't have been able to exert the same kind of charismatic influence. He was hugely inventive and he was wonderfully aggressive, and he had a wonderful intuitive sense of cricket, tactically and strategically. But it's not a given that he would have been a successful captain, and maybe no more successful than the very, very remarkable captains of that era. Steve Waugh was no slouch. I mean, his record speaks for itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think now there's been enough online debate about if Warne was the greatest captain Australia never had, and I really like the way Jarrod puts it on occasion, that they probably didn't like him speaking to the press as much as or like putting Warne in front of the press as the captain would have been a little more difficult, because there's always so much going on with Warne outside of the game.
Yeah, I mean, if you're an administrator, you would have picked up your morning paper with a certain feeling of dread and not knowing exactly what might appear the next day. Because I don't think that Warne was going to let captaincy cramp his style at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no way Warne would have probably changed the way he was going to approach the game because somebody said so. Which also brings me to an interesting question. How did Warne treat his captains in Australia? There's Alan Border, there's Mark Taylor, there's Ricky Ponting. So there are two. There's a father figure, there is a brother, and then there is a peer.
Yeah.
So how does that work as a bystander for you, having covered and seen him in all these three phases?
Yeah, I think I mean, certainly I talked before about his influence on Alan Border, and he added another dimension to Border's captaincy. There's no doubt about it. It's a shame that Border didn't get a greater opportunity to captain Warne. I mean, he loved having him under his captaincy in '93-4, but Border was coming to the to the end of the line by that stage. I think I mean, for all the players who played under Border, Border played for such a long period of time. A lot of the players who ended up playing under him had first, revered him as a hero. So he had a natural authority, a natural stature in that dressing room. And the young Warne, no matter what he became later, was very differential to the older players in his era. He was quite. I always remember how he used to call Graham Gooch Mr. Gooch. So he was a young man, and he behaved as a young man does. When surrounded by players whom he knew had a great reputation. He was very close to Steve Waugh. They were more or less contemporaries. So in some ways, they were natural kinsmen. The problem was that, of course, in 1999, Steve Waugh was responsible for leaving Shane out of an Australian team in the West Indies. And while Warne could accept criticism, while Warne could, from the press, and never sulked about it, he at that time, I think he felt very vulnerable. He wasn't sure about his future, and he resented bitterly that Steve Waugh kicked him when he was down. I think that was the way that Warne perceived it. That this was the time when people should have been showing faith in him, and Steve had taken a short-term decision based on form rather than backing the long-term stature and class of Shane vis-a-vis Stuart MacGill. I've left out Mark Taylor. I think Shane always regarded Mark Taylor as the best captain that he played under. I think he partly did that out of pique with Steve Waugh, because there was part of Warne that always liked to if he had the opportunity later in his career to say something slightly disparaging about Steve Waugh, he probably would take it. And of course, he really loved Ponting. He loved Ponting as a contemporary. He could remember Ponting as a young man coming in the dressing room. But by that stage, I think Warne was pretty much running his own race. I think Warne more or less decided when he was going to bowl, what he was going to bowl, and what field he was going to set. And there was a kind of a game within the game. Warne was his own captain by the time Ponting came along. And Ponting was smart enough, intuitive enough to accept that the best of Warne was extracted under conditions where Warne felt as though he had control.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially because Warne always liked to be in control. And one of the things that I always go back to is your chapter, The Art of Warne on Warne, your book, where Warne keeps telling the ball's always going to come back. And I always have a second chance to go at you.
Yes, yeah.
And in that chapter, I think, and again, you've written about it, and Usman Samiuddin has written about it in Crick Info as well. The walk back.
Yes.
The theater revolves not in Warnie's run-up, but in the walk back. In talking to an opponent, in talking to his captain, in talking to the umpire. Tell us a little bit more about it, and if there are any anecdotes that you remember.
I think there are obviously stages in Warne's career because he played for over a long period, and his body, the action didn't change that much, but it was susceptible to injury. Early on in his career, Warne talked incessantly about all the different balls he could bowl. And he always had a ball up his sleeve. He always talked about this mystery ball that he was working on. And he kind of conjured a bit of a cult out of that. And the media lapped it up and Warne used him as an amplifier. But in the second half of his career, Warne didn't talk about that all that much. Warne kind of abandoned that pretense. He moved on quite quickly. And the way in which he exerted control over the game was more about his presence on the field. And his presence was magnetic. He's an incredibly charismatic figure. And he understood that. And he harnessed it in his exertions. And he understood that the bowler dictates the timing of the game. The batsman can't play without until the bowler is ready. So he used it. He used every second of every over to amplify his threat. And it was, I always find myself thinking back to 2005 because, it was a case of England versus Australia and Warne versus England. They were sort of overlapping contests. And Warne just hammed it up for all he was worth that summer. He loved playing against England. He loved playing in England. He was capable of manipulating the English in ways that he probably couldn't even Australian crowds. I think there's something about the intimacy of English cricket grounds that particularly suited Warne's various artifices. And the minute that Warne came on, everyone sat up, everyone looked, every eye was turned on the centre, and Warne enjoyed the opportunity to make them wait, to make them think, to make everything seem as though it was part of his master plan. If he bowled a bad ball, he never looked chagrined. He always looked as though, yes, okay, well, you saw that one, but are you going to see this one? There was always a kind of a subtle sort of monologue, an unspoken monologue, and spoken monologue, of course, where Warne was concerned, and it involved the batsmen, the fielders, the umpire, sometimes even the commentators. He loved it. He absolutely loved it. There was a lot going on in Warne's life, of course, that summer. In some respects, his personal life was out of control, and that seemed to magnify how much he enjoyed the serenity, the privacy, the intimacy of the experience of playing.
was then the ground space the only safe space for Warne
Well,
at that point in time?
probably was. Yeah, he was master of its finite possibilities, and he was at the absolute top of his game. And in an Ashes series, and of course, an Ashes series being 5 Test matches in duration, is the perfect opportunity to get a variety of conditions. And Warne would have backed himself like 3 times out of 5. 3 times out of 5, he would have thought the conditions are absolutely in my favour, and I'm going to take the opportunity that presents itself.
No discussion on Warne is complete without having a chat about the ball of the century.
Mm-hmm.
You wrote in your wisdom piece that were you also there with Kerry O'Keefe at the Carbine Cricket Club?
No, I wasn't. Oh yeah, no, it was a story that I heard. It was
Okay.
a story that I heard.
And you were at the ground?
It was actually no, I wasn't at the ground. No, the story didn't actually come out until Warne died.
Okay.
A reader wrote to me and said that he was there. He was standing next to Jenna as Jenna was watching the ball on the TV. It is a great story, and I think that my informant did actually ask Warne. He actually found himself playing golf alongside Warne one day and asked him about the story that Jenna had said that he and Jenna had agreed that Warne was just going to bowl a few flat deliveries, just feel his way into the contest, not worry too much about spinning it too much, not worrying too much about hero balls. And then in the instant, Warne decided, well, here I am. I'm going to give it my absolute best shot. It is a great story. Because like a lot of Warne stories, when you hear them, you go, that'd be right. That's exactly what Warne would do.
And where were you when the ball of the century was happening? And what were your initial impressions?
I was listening to it on radio.
Oh wow!
It's funny. I didn't see it at the time, and Jonathan Agnew was commentating, and I think Agnew must have been behind the keeper, because he didn't know what had happened. He thought that maybe the ball had bounced off Gadding's pads, and he was puzzled to see Gadding walk away. And I remember thinking that was kind of intrinsic to Warne's magic, that he made you. It wasn't simply that he made you look; it was that he made you look again. He made you think, did my eyes deceive me, or did that just happen? And of course, here we are, all these years later, we're still watching the ball of the century, and there's still something new to see about it every time you watch. Something that you haven't noticed, some amazing aspect to it, some dimension that you hadn't previously appreciated. I watched that ball when I was writing on Warne. I watched it over and over again, and it never gets old. It never gets stale. It's still as magical as ever.
It does, because I have a very funny story about it. Because, of course, I hadn't seen it live, and I'd seen it much later in life, and I think that was probably one of the reasons for the infatuation with Warne getting to these hysteric levels. But I wanted to chat a little bit about the legacy of Warne as a leg spinner. And there's a little story here. I had a young colleague, about 22, 23, and a leg spinner. And he didn't get selected in his school cricket team.
Yeah.
And he went back home and saw all of Warne's tips and tricks of bowling the different deliveries and learnt the wrong one and got selected.
Yes.
And This is a random kid in Mumbai who's doing this because of YouTube.
Yep.
And everyone who ever talks about copying an action always talks about copying Warne. Whether they are a pacer or a spinner, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You've always copied Warne.
Yeah.
And so what's Warne's legacy as a as a spinner to getting more and more people get into the game? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, as a leg spinner, you'd have to say that in Australia the dividend's been a bit disappointing. There have been no really good post-Warne leg spinners.
Yeah.
Which is an enormous shame. Well, actually, the spinners have been female. I think that Alana King, Georgia Wareham, Amanda Jade Wellington, they probably got excited by leg spin. I'm almost certain that they got into leg spin through Warne. And there is actually something very formidable about leg spin in women's cricket. It's highly effective. It's infinitely puzzling. I think, Warne's inheritors probably have been either female in Australia or, Rashid Khan. Rashid Khan, I'm sure, was inspired by Warne. I actually see a little bit of Warne's flair in Rashid Khan as well as his skill. But I think it's about more than just leg spin. It's about opening one's mind to the possibilities of cricket, not simply in the domain in which Warne excelled, but the whole sense of cricket being a theatre for an individual. In some ways, Virat Kohli is, by his incredible charismatic communication with the crowd, I kind of think of him as a sort of a post-Warne figure. I'm not sure that Virat's ever said anything about Warne, but he seems to have the same sort of sense of occasion, the same understanding of the theatricality of cricket as Warne has. And I think that not every great player has that. Not every player looks completely comfortable in the limelight. I mean, interestingly, Joe Root always looks as though he'd much rather just be batting. Doesn't really want to think about anything else. But Virat for sure. Virat loves being the center of attention in the same way as Warne did.
I'm not sure if it's an appropriate question or not, but or if you can answer this. But does the attention being on Warne makes life easier for everybody else around him? Does it allow them to perform with less of a eye on their performances, because Warne's going to take the attention on himself? I'll give you a good example. Generally, I mean, in the era of Sir Alex Ferguson at Man United, he would always go and have a go after the game if in the event United had lost or conceded a goal or drawn at the last minute or something like that. So all the attention would be on Sir Alex Ferguson, and everybody's forgotten what those 11 players on the pitch have done. Now, with the attention being on a Virat Kohli or on, let's say, Warne in this case, does it allow everybody else to function at a much more peaceful pace than they otherwise would have? Or the pressures of international cricket are such that everybody just has to be 100% all the time?
I don't think any player would ever relax just because they felt they had Warne in the team. There was no sense in that very, very great Australian side of let's just leave it to Warne. But there was a sense that we have Warne and other teams don't. And Warne, of course, is a leg spinner. The remarkable thing about Warne was that he could bowl in all conditions. He wasn't really dependent on the pitch crumbling. Wasn't only a last day bowler. Warne's great expression was, if it seems it spins, he could bowl just as effectively on a McGrath friendly pitch as McGrath. So he's an amazingly versatile spinner. I don't know whether I haven't really looked at Warne's first innings record against his second innings record, but I can't imagine that they're all that different. The other thing was about Warne was that he was a kind of an inspirational character. He was that line in War and Peace where Tolstoy's writing about the Battle of Borodino and the fact that a battle can be won by a man who shouts hurrah. Warne was often the man who shouted hurrah in that Australian side, and there's probably no better example than the Adelaide Test match of 2006, where the Aussies turn up on the last morning, think, well, probably this is going to be a draw. And Warne says, "Oh, bugger it! No, we can win this game. We can absolutely win this game because England will only want to draw if we go out and we play for a win. We'll be a step ahead of them all the way through." And it was an absolutely incredible day of cricket. That's a day that I was there. England had scored 6 for 551 in the first innings and ended up getting pantsed on the last day. I've never known press conferences like it afterwards. Andrew Flintoff having to rationalise what had taken place, and the Australians just not being able to quite believe what they'd pulled off. But Warne believed. Yeah. Warne believed all the way through. Warne never stopped believing, and he conveyed that sense of belief to his teammates. I remember I bumped into Terry Jenner on that last day, and he was talking about, I don't know, and he was telling me that, once Ashley Giles starts bowling over the wicket into the rough, Australia's going to find it very, very difficult to score. I reckon that England can really bottle this game up. And no, there's still probably, this was actually after England had been bowled out. He still didn't think that Australia could win. Well, the Australians bloody well did, and they pulled it off. I never saw it. That was actually the last time I saw Terry Jenner. I never got the opportunity to remind him of that.
Again, interesting, because my next question was on that Adelaide test, where and I want you to probably elaborate on this a little more. Warne is the great eater of minds, is what Simon Barnes wrote in the Times. His spinning of cricket balls is his secondary talent. His biggest talent is centrifuging the souls of his opponents. What we saw on that long, sad Tuesday was a succession of cricketers who unmistakably lost their minds in their attempt to play Warne. Do you play Warne, or do you play the delivery?
Look, the two are certainly interrelated, but I don't think that does justice to Warne, the spinner. He was the best that there ever was, and he was able to exert that psychological hold on players because he was that bloody good.
Yeah.
Other leg spinners could have gone through the same rituals. They could have practiced the same sort of attempted mind games. They could have choreographed and over at exactly the same pace as Warne. They could have had the mastery of all the same gestures and glares and smiles and smirks and snide remarks. But you got to have the skills. And we'll go back to how I began it. It's just astounding that someone could do something so difficult, so consistently well for so long, when the whole of the cricket world was trying to work out how he did it. And this is a paradox of Warne's. Warne was always incredibly public about how he did what he did. I lost count of the number of times that Warne did a masterclass for TV at lunchtime. This is how I bowl a leg break. This is how I bowl a toppy. This is how I bowl a googly. Didn't matter how many times you did it. You still had to play it, and he knew it.
So Michael Atherton has written about it, that none of Warne's balls are original. All of them are borrowed by someone or the other from history. But he seemingly made them his own in history by these masterclasses and by bowling them so consistently in world cricket, which is a good segue to something that I don't think is discussed enough. Is Warne the ODI bowler?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
And 1999 was an interesting time where he got the man of the match in both the semi-finals and the finals.
Yes.
But I'll take you back a little more 3 years before that to the semi-final in 1996 versus West Indies at Mohali.
Yes. Yep.
McGrath got Shivnarayan Chanderpaul, and apparently that gave Warne an opening. Any memories of that, and maybe a word or two on his ODI bowling?
Well, I think the crucial thing about Warne's ODI bowling was that he bowled to take wickets. He didn't bowl to cut the runs. He didn't bowl to negative fields. He realised that the optimum way to impede a scoring rate was to get batsmen out. So he bowls aggressively. He still bowls big spinners. He doesn't try to drag his length back. He doesn't just try to bowl dot balls. He tries to put constant pressure, and that was actually a bit paradoxical in one-day cricket at that time. It was all about containment in one-day cricket, but the Australians played their one-day cricket with uncompromising aggression, and Warne was kind of fundamental to that. And that game that you talk about is a case in point. Basically Australia had to bowl the West Indies out, didn't they? It was a target that if the West Indies batted the overs, they'd pass it comfortably. So the only way to win was to bowl as if they were playing in a Test match.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is that between both Warne and Saklen, both of whom I regard as probably better ODI bowlers than the other spinners that were around.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Even though the other spinners like Kumble and Murli probably have very, very good Test records that probably Saklen never got a chance to, is that they used to bowl at the death.
Mm.
And that is actually very, very strange, because that's a trend that's now coming back to T20 cricket after like 30 years.
Yes.
And that always was fascinating, because being in India, you're always told that spinners are trash. I mean, just go and hit them. I mean, and then you realize that these greats are bowling 50th over in an ODI game. I think Warne had a maiden in the 50th over of an ODI game, if I remember correctly, and so did Saklen. So that just astounds me, especially because ODIs were supposed to be this fast-moving game versus Tests, and kids would be watching more ODIs than Tests, at least at that point in time. All right. When did you first meet Warne, and what were your first?
It's my cat. When did I first meet Warne? I first met Warne in a pub in Brighton. I went to interview him for Inside Sport magazine. I'd seen him play, but I think this was 94. He'd just come back from South Africa. He was on his way to Pakistan, and I think we wanted a long interview with him, and he certainly gave us a long interview. It was such a long interview that we actually had to run it over 2 months. Warne gave great value. Warne always seemed in interview to have all the time in the world. He was a brilliant interviewee. I remember we both smoked at the time. Warne, we filled an ashtray between us. This very much dates me. You were actually able to smoke in pubs in those days. And at one point, I remember I ran out of cigarettes, and Warne fished around in his bag and he got me a packet of Benson and Hedges, because of course in those days Benson and Hedges was the sponsor of Australian cricket. And he said, here's a packet, I've got plenty. So Warne was never short of a cigarette. And I really liked him. I really warmed to him. I found him fascinating. I found him playful. I found him amusing. I found him genuine. And they were impressions that were confirmed every time I went back to interview him. And I probably interviewed him at length about half a dozen times in his career, and he was always the same man. Sometimes you thought that you'd sort of a couple of years you hadn't talked to Warne. You think, probably Warne's changed. Warne's kind of grown up, or Warne's kind of different. But he was never different. Never different. Always the same man that I met that first day. Always very personable. Always took an interest in you. No, I liked him. I liked him a lot.
Now, a little bit of a detour, but John Crace in The Wisden writes that Gideon Haigh is too close to his subject when he reviewed on Warne, and we've discussed this, I think, in the past as well, that it's very difficult to write about cricketers who you are close to.
Yeah.
And incidentally, you've written about two of my favorite cricketers, both Warne and Wasim. And in both cases, there are shades of grey.
Sure.
How do you approach that?
I think you approach it as I mean, I haven't been close to many cricketers. Generally speaking, I've not made a huge effort to get to know cricketers in detail, because I do think I appreciate the point that Craig is making there, that in the end you kind of you have to exercise a disinterested, independent perspective. You have to be able to call it as you see it, and sometimes that can be compromised by sort of personal affinities. I mean, just to digress even further, it was the most difficulty I ever had in writing about a cricketer was writing about Ed Cowan, because he was a really good friend of mine and still is. And our friendship predated him playing Test cricket. So I was hugely excited about him playing Test cricket. I lived every ball with him. Jarrod and I actually were at Trent Bridge together in 2013 when he played his last Test match. And I remember we both knew Ed at the time. And I think when Ed got out in that first innings, we just both looked absolutely white. We were devastated when he got out first ball in what proved to be Ed's final Test. But at the same time, I did write critically about Warne. I wrote critically about him over match fixing. I wrote very critically about him about the diuretic, and I'm critical of him about the diuretic in On Warne as well. But I did think that Warne got a lot of criticism that was unfair. That I disapprove fundamentally, and still do, of the kind of the pack mentality in journalism that just decides something is off or someone is off, and kind of unanimously assail someone. Sometimes we can just be too fickle, and we can be just a little bit too unanimous in our disfavour. I always tried to think about it from Warne's perspective. I mean, I'm nothing like Warne. We're not remotely similar. But I did try to see the game, or to cut him some slack, considering the pressures of the scrutiny that he found himself under.
Yeah, that's again interesting, because a bulk of what you write is also behind a paywall. So a lot of things that we do read are probably, because On Warne is so widely read. I think that does give people an idea that maybe you're a little sympathetic towards Warne, which is not the case.
Well, it's pretty hard not to be sympathetic to Warne by the end of his career. I mean, he was so great. I mean, how do you sum up a cricketer like that? It's like trying to write about a monument. And I think the intention behind On Warne, which I think I wrote in 2012, was that I feared at the time that Warne was just becoming very active on social media. He was becoming a bit of a personality, interpreted chiefly through his Twitter account. He was in danger of becoming a parody of himself. And I did want to remind myself, before he receded altogether from view, of what it had been like to watch him. I wanted it to be a kind of a time capsule to someone in the next generation who maybe hadn't had the opportunity to see Warne live, who hadn't been able to see Warne at first hand, who hadn't been kind of captivated by the theatre of an overload. That's why I spend quite a lot of time describing him in that book. Now, it's kind of counterintuitive to describe someone who has been so many times, who has been seen so many times. But sometimes when you see something so often, you begin to take it for granted. I wanted to sort of somehow encapsulate the magic of seeing Warne for the first time.
Yeah, I think that goes well, because I still haven't completed On Warne. because on Warne, and there are a couple more books, because the feeling of reading it for the first time shouldn't end. So I I've read
Or you're just a very slow reader.
it's probably taken 12 years, but that's fine. Uh, because the art of Warne is what interests me
Sure.
the most, especially the release of the ball, the act of going back, uh, and what it does to your shoulders, especially as a leg spinner. And
Yeah.
it's very interesting that the two great spinners that you love, both of them had something in their childhoods that ensured that they did what they did with less pain versus the others. I'll give you what I'm talking about. Warne had that horrible injury, so he was on all fours.
Yes.
And that ensured that his shoulders were probably the strongest shoulders in the game, so to speak.
Sure.
Which is not the case for every leg spinner, and that's why it does seem more difficult for them, and it does seem easier for Warne. And very recently, I heard a podcast where Angad Bedi, the son of the great Bishan Singh Bedi, was there. And Bishan Singh Bedi used to tell Angad to play marbles. He's like, if you keep playing marbles, then your fingers are going to be strong, and you're going to be able to turn the ball at will and for a longer period of time.
Yeah.
And these are little things that are again missed by people, because again, everybody thinks bowling is easy. But these are things that probably happened in childhood, and they just lasted a lifetime, especially in the case of both Warne and in the case of Bishan Singh Bedi.
Strange thing about Warnie's hand was that he had a strong hand, a big hand, stubby fingers. When he shook your hand, he enveloped it, but he didn't grip it hard. There is a bit of a tradition in Australia of the really, really tough, masculine handshake. Warnie didn't have a handshake like that, and he caressed the ball. He actually held the ball quite gently. He didn't grip it really tightly. Jenna was very puzzled about this when he first met Warne, and said, why aren't you really gripping it tightly? Warne just said, well, it doesn't feel right. And it was all about feel with Warne. It was all about his sympathy for the ball through his hands. He did what came naturally. In some respects, he discovered leg spin from first principles. He kind of he intuited leg spin. I know he was taught leg spin by Kim Pitt from East Sandringham, but he did it his way. There's no doubt about it. No one had previously bowled leg spin like Warne. He although Mike is right to say that that the balls are all borrowed, his particular interpretation of those balls was unique.
Absolutely. And again, we'll have to go back to Jarrod on this, because I heard him say this, that now leg spinners don't have one wrong one. They have many wrong ones. Like Rashid Khan has the wrong one that has the first finger held a little loosely. He has a wrong one where the wrist moves faster. I mean, bunch of these things. I mean, the more you watch the game, the more you realize that all wrong ones are also not the same. But that's very interesting, because again, Sakleen, because Sakleen hasn't done as many master classes, so to speak, as Warne has. So there's very little footage of it. But I used to hold the ball very tightly as a left arm spinner if I bowled spin, and then very, very recently, I think maybe a year ago, I just saw a video where Sakleen said, no, the ball has to be held very loosely. And then it releases in the way that you want, and you can feel the seam going out of your hand. And once that is in place, is when you know how it's going to pitch and what's it going to do, and what the batsman might not be able to do versus. And that was absolutely shocking, because here we are taught in this era of T20 and ODI bowling, just bowl wicket to wicket, bowl wicket to wicket.
Yeah.
but just the simple act of holding the ball loosely was very, very interesting, even for pacers. And Praveen Kumar had a very interesting interview. It was largely in Hindi, but it's on YouTube, where he talks about learning the intricacies of the pressures of each finger on the seam, and how that would allow him to swing the ball or seam the ball when he was bowling. And these are little things that pretty much you can have 20 master classes, but nobody's going to talk about it unless the interviewer asks about it.
And they're also the kind of things that a bowler can only discover themselves.
Oh yes,
I don't think that's the kind of thing that a coach can impart. You teach yourself things like that. And in Warne's case, you do what came naturally.
Yeah. Which brings me to just a final couple of questions. What are your favorite spells of Warne in Tests and in ODIs? I know the obvious ones are there, but or let's make it interesting. What's the best spell of Warne that you watched live, apart from the Adelaide one that you already shared?
That's pretty good. That was pretty damn good. I can remember him bowling on the first day at the Oval in 2005. And it was a flat pitch. There was nothing much in it. And England were batting with great confidence by that stage in the series. And Australia, McGrath wasn't quite fit. They had Sean Tate in the attack, and he wasn't quite up to it. Australia looked really just a bit off the pace. It was a very unusual sensation to have for that Australian side. So Warne seemed to bowl all day that day. Andrew Strauss got 100, but Warne just kept bloody checking them, and he was like he was like the on the bridge at Thermopylae. He was just not going to let England get past. And he kept pegging them back all day. It was a massive attritional effort. And then he bowled 1,000,000 overs in the second innings as well. He got 12 for in the game, but he still wasn't quite capable of breaking England's resistance. It really did feel like it was Warne against England. And I can remember when he came on, the game had almost slumbered until Warne appeared. And then it was just like he cleared everyone else away. And he just took the ball and he didn't let it go. Ponting came up to him periodically to talk to him, and it was almost like Warne sort of brushed him off like a bureaucrat. Later, Ricky, later. Just leave it to me. I'll do it. I can remember thinking, this probably won't be remembered as one of Warne's great days, but just the sheer indomitable will that he showed that day really impressed itself on my mind. That's one that really stands out, and because by the end of that series, we were conscious that we'd seen something absolutely amazing, and we really had to hold on to every moment.
Also reminds me of that Cape Town Test, his 100th.
Yes,
he bowled
yep.
98 overs.
Yeah, yep.
He got 16 of his mates and family to come and watch 98 overs of bowling in that Cape Town Test, and of course took wickets as well. Anything in the ODIs that stands out? I mean, one of the things that always worries me about the current bowlers is that there's just so much cricket that
Yes.
That we forget what they've done in a random ODI series. But the 90s was a great time to essentially see ODIs as well, especially colored clothing. Australia was great on TV.
Yeah.
Especially for us in India. Anything that stands out for you?
Well, of course, that Australia-South Africa game, I guess that's the obvious one, isn't it? Where he bowls Herschel Gibbs and Gary Kirsten, and he's just absolutely irresistible. And, a week earlier, people had been writing him off. He hadn't really bounced back from the injuries that he'd been bearing through the Australian team. He'd lost his place, of course, in the Australia-West Indies series. He and Waugh were not seeing eye to eye at that stage. I can remember I can remember talking to Warne about this and what his actual problem was with war, specifically in 1999, and he talked about this particular press conference in the West Indies where Steve Waugh was asked whether there was any. It was significant that Warne was vice captain of that team, and whether that would count at the selection table. And Waugh was quite dismissive of the idea that a vice captain would get preferential treatment. Warne was pissed about that, like really pissed. The Australian vice captaincy was something that really mattered to him. He took it seriously, and he remonstrated with Steve Waugh about it afterwards. He said, if Mark Taylor had said that about you, about your vice captaincy, how would you have felt about that? And I think Steve Waugh did get the message about that. Warne also realised, I think, and he constantly stressed it in his discussion of the game, was that it only ever takes one ball to get a batsman out, and that your best ball is only one ball away. That anything could happen, and he was carried forth by that conviction, even when he was in the West Indies in 1999 and he was bowling badly. He was really, really struggling. He continued to believe that his best was just around the corner. And then when he gets Herschel Gibbs in that game and obviously celebrates mightily, it is like he's saying, "See, I told you. I was right all along." He wasn't just saying, "Come on, Australia." He was saying, "I was right." He was enjoying the sensation of being vindicated, and I shared that sensation with him because I was watching that game and I thought, "Oh yeah, he is back. He is back." And I was beginning to think, "Oh, he was never away. He was never away." But of course, he had been away. He'd been away and he had come back. But he'd always believed that the comeback was inevitable.
Yeah, I think that's a great note to probably move on today. And we're recording this to commemorate the 55th, what would have been the 55th birthday of Shane.
Yeah.
And what better way to end the episode than this? So thanks once again, Gideon, for coming on the pod and discussing at length one of our favorite topics, Shane
Easy.
Keith Warne.
Always easy. He's the gift that keeps on giving. I miss him, but isn't it fantastic that we can still converse about him and he still feels alive when you talk about him.
Absolutely.
The prodigal son turned Messiah gets his second 100 in successive.
India have won in dramatic style. The whole of Bengal